Chapter 1. The Interview. The qualifications were listed on cream-colored paper in handwriting so precise it looked engraved. Alice Ward read them twice. Fluency in Italian, intermediate Latin, experience in covert intelligence gathering and counter-surveillance, familiarity with formal diplomatic protocol, an ability to remain composed under sustained psychological pressure. She looked up from the paper at the man sitting across from her. He was very still. Not the stillness of someone waiting patiently, the stillness of someone who had forgotten that humans move between sentences. His eyes were dark and faintly amber-ringed, and they hadn't blinked since she sat down. "Do you have questions?" he said. It wasn't a question. "No," Alice said. This was because Alice Ward did not speak Italian, did not read Latin, had never gathered intelligence of any kind, could not have identified a counter-surveillance technique if one introduced itself at a party, and had once been asked to leave a work dinner for calling her boss's PowerPoint a war crime against fonts. But she was 4 months behind on rent, and the ad had said, "Human applicants welcome," which in Vampire Court job listings meant they needed someone warm-blooded for a role their own kind couldn't fill. Vampire courts had been part of the civic landscape for as long as anyone could remember. Old money, old blood, older grudges. Most humans ignored them the way they ignored embassies, vaguely aware, not their problem. Alice had never given them much thought. She was giving them thought now, because they were offering to pay her. "Your references," said the man, Benedict Marchand, according to the card she'd been handed by a very tired-looking man at the door, "indicate experience in high-pressure environments." "Extensive," Alice said. Her most recent high-pressure environment had been a phone call with her landlord. "And you're Italian." "Fluent." She knew the word ciao. She knew espresso. She was reasonably confident about pizza. She had once ordered 2 bicchieri di vino from a phrase book at an Olive Garden, but the waiter had been from Ohio and it hadn't mattered. "And your Latin?" "Intermediate." Alice's relationship with Latin consisted entirely of knowing that it was a language and that it was dead. She had these 2 facts in common with most of the population. Counter-surveillance experience? Extensive. She had once noticed her ex-boyfriend following her on Instagram from a fake account. She had considered this surveillance. She had countered it by blocking him. This was, technically, counter-surveillance. Benedict Marchand studied her. His head tilted approximately 2 degrees. The movement was so controlled, it looked mechanical. "Sinclair," he said without raising his voice. The tired-looking man who'd met her at the door materialized at Benedict's shoulder. He was pale. They were all pale in this building, Alice had noticed, as if sunlight were a rumor none of them had verified. And he had the expression of someone who had been personally inconvenienced by the last 3 centuries. "Sir?" "Your assessment." Sinclair looked at Alice. Alice looked back with what she hoped was the face of a woman who spoke fluent Italian. "She listed her previous employer as Greg's Crab Shack," Sinclair said. "A cover identity," Benedict said. "Her emergency contact is her cat. Operational security. Her cat's name is Gerald. An excellent operational alias." "Sir, the cat's name is Gerald because it is a cat. Named Gerald. She has a photograph of Gerald on her phone. I saw it when she was trying to find the building on her Maps application. Gerald is orange." "Sinclair." Benedict's voice did not change in volume or pitch. It simply arrived at a register that made the air in the room settle. "Your assessment of the candidate, please?" "My assessment is that she cannot spy." "Noted. My assessment is that she has never spied." "Also noted. My assessment is that hiring her would constitute the most significant intelligence failure of this court in 300 years, and I would like to formally register my objection." "Registered." Benedict turned back to Alice. "Miss Ward, I am going to describe an assignment. You will tell me if you are capable of executing it." "Absolutely," said Alice, who was capable of almost nothing he was about to describe. He told her. The assignment was to enter the household of Lady Cecily Voss under a cover identity, cultural liaison, hired to modernize the estate's events programming, and to observe, document, and report on the movements, alliances, and vulnerabilities of the Voss court. The placement would be arranged through a neutral staffing agency that both courts used for human hires. The placement would last approximately 6 weeks. Communication would be handled through a secure, encrypted channel. Compensation was substantial. "Why me?" Alice asked, and immediately regretted it. Because the answer was almost certainly, "We haven't found anyone else stupid enough." "Vampire operatives are detectable," Benedict said. "Our kind can sense each other. Heartbeat frequency, body temperature, the way the air moves around something that doesn't breathe. A human operative is invisible to those senses. You register as staff. Background noise." "Background noise," Alice repeated. "That's very flattering." "It is not intended as flattery. It is intended as tactical advantage." Alice heard the compensation number. Alice said yes. She did not ask what a cultural liaison did. She did not ask what would happen if Lady Cecily Voss discovered that her new events consultant was actually a broke 27-year-old whose most significant professional achievement was once alphabetizing a supply closet. "Excellent," Benedict said. He folded his hands on the desk. His fingers were long and pale and completely motionless. "You begin in 3 days." 3 days, Alice repeated. "Is that insufficient?" "No, 3 days that's plenty." 3 days was not plenty. 3 days was barely enough time to Google, "What is a cultural liaison?" Sinclair walked her to the door. His hand on the handle, he paused. "Miss Ward?" "Yes?" He looked at her with an expression she would later identify as pity, specific, centuries deep. The look of a man watching someone walk into a burning building and take a seat. "Do you know what Lady Cecily Voss is?" "A vampire?" "She is the head of a rival house that has contested this court's territorial claims for 200 years. She has survived 4 assassination attempts, 2 regime changes, and a century of political exile. She once made a member of the Pureblood Council weep during a formal dinner, not through violence, but through a toast." Alice swallowed. "And you are going to spy on her?" "Yes. With your extensive experience from Greg's crab shack." It was a very demanding crab shack. Sinclair opened the door for her. As she stepped through, she heard him say, very quietly, to no one in particular, "I have served this court for 300 years. I have trained operatives in 5 wars. This is the worst day of my professional life." Alice sat on a bench outside the building and stared at the sky. She had agreed to spy on an ancient vampire in exchange for money. She did not speak Italian. She pulled out her phone and typed, "How to spy." The first result was a children's party kit. "Great," Alice said. "Perfect. This is going to be fine." Chapter 2. The First Dispatch. The encrypted communication app was called Veil Secure. It had a 17-step verification process, a retinal scan Alice's phone did not support, and a terms of service agreement written in what appeared to be medieval Latin. Alice spent 40 minutes trying to log in. She received 3 error messages, a security lockout, and a notification that her account had been flagged for anomalous biometric patterns. She texted Sinclair. "Alice, the app won't let me in." "Alice, it says my face is anomalous." Sinclair, "That is the retinal scanner. You need the secondary device." Alice, "What secondary device?" Sinclair, "The one you were issued at orientation." Alice, "There was no orientation." Sinclair, "I see." At 3:14 a.m., on her first night at the Voss estate, Alice woke to a tapping at her window. A vampire stood on the narrow ledge outside. He was wearing a formal coat. He was holding a letter sealed with actual wax. He looked as though he had been personally wronged by the concept of gravity. "Correspondence," he said, "from His Majesty." Alice took the letter. The vampire disappeared into the dark without waiting for a reply, which Alice felt was rude because she had questions. She broke the seal. Inside, in that same engraved handwriting, Miss Ward. Catalog the movements of the steward between dusk and the third bell. Note alliances visible in seating arrangements at the evening meal. Document any correspondence arriving at the south gate after midnight. Report findings through the secure channel. B.M. Alice sat on her bed for a long time. She did not know what the third bell was. She did not know who the steward was. She did not know which gate was the south gate. She was not entirely sure she knew what a steward did. She picked up her phone and typed, "What does a steward do in a vampire court?" The internet did not have this information because the internet did not know vampire courts existed. She typed, "What is a third bell?" The internet suggested a cocktail bar in Brooklyn. She put the phone down and looked at the wax-sealed letter from a 600-year-old vampire king who believed he had hired a competent intelligence operative. "I could tell him," she said to the ceiling. "I could just tell him." She imagined the conversation. "Hi, Your Majesty. Quick update. I have no skills. I've never gathered intelligence. The closest I've come to formal protocol is a company holiday party where I accidentally called the CEO Dave because his name was Dave, and apparently that was wrong. Also, I looked up Dead Drop on my phone and it showed me a skate park." She imagined Benedict's face. The 2-degree head tilt, the absence of expression, the careful amber dark eyes processing the information that his newest asset was a 27-year-old who listed a cat as her emergency contact. She could not tell him. Not because she was brave, because she was proud. Stupidly, ruinously, catastrophically proud. And the pride said, "You took the money, you shook the hand, you said absolutely in a room with a vampire king, and you are going to figure this out or die trying." The pride did not mention that die trying was a more literal possibility than usual. She did not know that the secure channel did not work. The Voss estate was old. Alice could feel it in the floors. Stone that had been walked on for so long it had developed opinions about shoes. Roland, the household vampire who had been assigned to orient her, walked 3 steps ahead and did not look back. "The east wing," he said, gesturing. "Which one is east?" Roland stopped. He turned. He looked at her with an expression that suggested the concept of not knowing which direction was east had never previously occurred to him. "East," he said, "is the direction opposite west." "Thank you, that clears it up. The west wing is behind you." "Got it. You are facing north." "I'm lost." Roland's mouth did a thing that was not quite a smile. "Your office is on the 2nd floor. The kitchen is through there. Lady Cecily receives guests in the East Wing library, which is east." "East, yes. You have grasped the fundamental concept." Alice's cover identity had arrived with a brief. She was a cultural events consultant hired to help the Voss household modernize its social programming. She had a business card. It said, "Alice Ward, Cultural Liaison," in a font she would have called aggressive. Her first morning, Roland introduced her to the household staff with the enthusiasm of a man delivering a weather report. "This is Miss Ward," Roland said. "She is here to improve things." "Hello," Alice said. "What things do I improve?" Roland stared at her. "Everything, presumably." "Right, everything. Of course." She found the kitchen by accident. The kitchen staff, 3 vampires and a human cook named Dan, were the first people in the building who looked at her without either suspicion or hunger. "You're the new one," Dan said. "I am. Cultural liaison." "That's what the card says." "What does a cultural liaison do?" "I'm still working that out." Dan gave her soup. It was excellent soup. "This is incredible soup," Alice said. "Thank you. Nobody says that. You're the first person to say that in how long have I worked here? He looked at the ceiling. 11 years. You are the first person in 11 years to comment on the soup. How is that possible? The soup is objectively the best thing in this building. The vampires don't eat soup. Right. They drink other things. Dan looked at her with the expression of a man who had accepted his workplace and moved on. Don't think about it too hard. She sat in the kitchen for 2 hours because no one asked her to leave, and in that time she learned the following. The steward's name was Corwin, and he was nervous about something specific that he wouldn't name. Lady Cecily had reorganized the East Wing Library for the 3rd time this year, and the household staff had a running bet on when the 4th would begin. Someone named Roland had been staring at the south gate every night for a week, and nobody knew why, but everyone had opinions. And the household was anxious about a visit from an unnamed dignitary that no one wanted to discuss. Who's the dignitary? Alice asked. Dan shrugged. Nobody tells me anything. I make soup. But you hear things. I hear everything. Kitchen's the crossroads. Everybody comes through here eventually. He paused. Even the ones who don't eat. Alice wrote her first report that evening. She wrote it by hand, because the encrypted app still thought her face was anomalous, and she gave it to the courier vampire when he appeared at her window at 3 a.m. The courier was the same one as before. He was still wearing the formal coat. He still looked personally wronged. You again, Alice said. I am a diplomatic courier for the Marchand court, he said. I have carried missives for kings. I have delivered declarations of war. I am standing on a windowsill. I'm sorry about the windowsill. The windowsill is fine. My dignity is not. What's your name? He blinked. She had apparently asked a question no one had thought to ask a diplomatic courier in several centuries. Ellsworth, he said after a pause. Ellsworth, I appreciate the windowsill service, truly. You are the first person to say that. In 140 years of courier service, you are the first person who has thanked me. That's terrible. It is a source of considerable professional resentment. Your report, please. She handed him the report. As he took it, she noticed the letter he'd brought was still on her desk. The one from Benedict. She'd read it 4 times, not because the instructions made more sense on the 4th reading, they did not, but because the handwriting was doing something to her she hadn't expected. Each letter was formed with the precision of someone who had been writing for 600 years and had opinions about the weight of a pen. No one wrote like that. No one alive wrote like that. Because no one alive had that much practice. She caught herself tracing the B of his signature with her finger and stopped. She was here for rent money. She was not here to develop feelings about penmanship. The report read, Day 1. Could not identify steward initially. His name is Corwin. He seems stressed. The kitchen staff are underappreciated, and the soup is excellent. Someone named Roland watches the south gate every night. There is a visit coming that everyone is worried about, but no one will discuss. Also, which way is south? I have been in the building for 12 hours and cannot find it. Sinclair read the report at 4 a.m. in Benedict's study. He read it twice. Then he put it down and pressed his fingers to his temples in a gesture that had, over 3 centuries, become his primary form of self-expression. She doesn't know which way south is, he said. Benedict was standing at the window with his back to the room. He had not moved in 20 minutes. The moonlight made his profile look carved from something colder than stone. She identified Roland, Benedict said. She identified that someone is staring at a gate. She doesn't know why. Roland has been running communications for Cecily's off-book alliance with House Sterling for 9 years. We have spent 4 of those years trying to confirm it. She found it on her first day. Sinclair was quiet for a long time. She found it because she sat in the kitchen, he said, with the voice of a man whose entire professional framework was being dismantled by soup. Yes, that is not tradecraft. And yet, Benedict turned from the window. In the candlelight, his eyes had gone darker. Not amber, not yet, but something closer to the color of old wine. He picked up the report and read the last line again. Also, which way is south? His mouth did something very small that might have been the beginning of something Sinclair had never seen him do. "Send her a compass," Benedict said, "and tell the courier to stop frightening her. He may knock." Chapter 3. The Visit. 3 weeks into the assignment, Alice had produced 11 reports. Sinclair had categorized them as follows. 3 contained actionable intelligence buried inside descriptions of food. 4 contained emotional observations about household members that were technically useless and inexplicably accurate. 2 contained complaints about the encrypted app. 1 contained a recipe for Dan's soup. And 1 consisted entirely of the sentence, "Roland did the thing again." Sinclair had shared select excerpts with Benedict during their morning briefings. He had read them in the voice of a man reciting autopsy findings. "Report 7, Sinclair said. Quote, "The west staircase renovation is using walnut, not oak. Corwin told me this while eating a sandwich. He eats the crusts first, which I think means he's anxious. People who eat crusts first are either anxious or very organized, and Corwin is not organized." End quote. Benedict turned a page of correspondence. And she has deduced more about Corwin's psychological state from his sandwich consumption than our previous operative learned in 4 months of surveillance. Yes. She doesn't know she's doing it. No. Sinclair put the report down. This is the worst intelligence operation I have ever supervised. It is the most productive. Those 2 facts should not coexist. And yet, Benedict looked up from his correspondence. Report 9, the one about the garden. Roland looked at the south gate for 47 minutes tonight. I timed it. He looked sad. Not angry sad. The kind of sad where you're waiting for someone who isn't coming back. End quote. Run it against the Sterling intercepts. Sinclair had run it. Roland's contact in the Sterling Alliance had been terminated 3 weeks before Alice's arrival. Roland had been waiting at the gate every night since. A trained operative would have noted the gate surveillance as a security pattern. Alice had identified the emotional trigger behind it. She had done this by noticing that a man looked sad. Alice did not know she was producing intelligence. She knew she was producing soup reviews. But somewhere between the kitchen conversations and the evening meals, Alice had done the thing that no trained operative in Benedict's employ had managed in a decade. She had made the Voss household like her. Not trust her, not confide in her, like her. People said things around Alice that they wouldn't say around someone they were watching carefully, because Alice didn't seem like someone who was watching at all. She asked about their gardens and their centuries and their opinions on the renovation of the west staircase. And they told her, not because she was extracting information, but because she was the first person in a very long time who appeared to genuinely care whether the staircase was walnut or oak. It was walnut. She had included this in Report 7. Sinclair had nearly resigned. Report 11, Sinclair said the following morning. He was holding the paper at arm's length, as though it might be contagious. Read it. The gardener seemed sad. I asked him why. He said it was about the roses. I don't think it's about the roses. I think he misses someone. Also, Dan made bread today, and it was extraordinary, and I think his contributions are undervalued. End quote. The gardener. Wendell. He has tended the Voss grounds for 170 years. What is he sad about? He is sad because his apprentice was recalled to the Sterling Court last month as part of the alliance restructuring that Miss Ward does not know about because she does not know there is an alliance restructuring. She identified the personnel movement. She identified that a man was sad, sir. She did not identify a personnel movement. She identified a feeling. Benedict picked up his pen. Put it down again. Send her a note. What should the note say? Tell her the roses in the south garden are a heritage variety and the gardener's knowledge of them is strategically significant. That is not true. It will give her a reason to speak with him further. You want me to lie to your operative, who can spy, so that she continues having emotional conversations with a gardener about roses, which you believe will somehow produce intelligence? Yes. Sir, I have trained assassins. I know. I have run counterintelligence operations in 3 wars. I know. I am now being asked to write notes about roses to a woman who listed her emergency contact as an orange cat. Gerald, Benedict said. The cat's name is Gerald. Sinclair left the room. He did not slam the door, because he had 300 years of composure. But the way he closed it communicated everything a slam would have. Benedict arrived at the Voss estate on a Tuesday evening, under the pretense of a diplomatic courtesy call. This was a fiction. Diplomatic courtesy calls between the Marchand and Voss courts had not occurred in 70 years, and everyone in both households knew it. Lady Cecily received him in the East Wing library. Alice, standing by the door in her capacity as cultural liaison, saw Benedict Marchand in person for the first time since the interview. He had not changed. He was exactly as still, exactly as pale, exactly as precisely assembled as she remembered. He wore a dark suit that fit him the way language fits a poet, without effort, without excess, as though it had been made by someone who understood that the body inside it did not move like other bodies moved. He did not look at her. This was deliberate. She could tell because his not looking had a quality of effort that his looking never did. But she was looking at him. She had not meant to. She had meant to stand by the door and be invisible and do the one thing she was apparently good at, which was observe. But observing Benedict Marchand was turning out to be a different experience than observing anyone else, because what she observed was a man so perfectly composed that the composure itself became the most interesting thing in the room. The way his hands rested on his knees, not relaxed, placed. The way his head turned toward Cecily, with the slow precision of something that could move much faster and was choosing not to. The way the candlelight caught the line of his throat, and she thought, involuntarily and inconveniently, that she had never noticed anyone's throat before in her life, and was now noticing his in a professional setting, and needed to stop immediately. She did not stop immediately. "Lady Cecily," he said, "thank you for receiving me." Lady Cecily Voss was not what Alice had expected. She had expected menacing. She had expected cold. She had expected the kind of calculated elegance that telegraphed danger in every gesture. What she got was a woman who looked approximately 40, wore her silver hair in a loose knot, and smiled at Benedict with the genuine warmth of someone who had been waiting a very long time for him to walk through her door. Not romantic warmth. Something older. The warmth of a wound that wanted to be acknowledged before it could close. "Benedict," Cecily said, "it has been 70 years. 68. You counted. I count everything. It is a failing." They sat. They talked. Alice stood by the door and watched, not because she was spying, but because she couldn't stop. The conversation was polite, careful. 2 people navigating 70 years of silence with the precision of surgeons, each word chosen not to heal, but to avoid tearing something further. Alice could hear the shapes of what they weren't saying, the territory, the seizure, the insult that had calcified into doctrine. Cecily never mentioned it directly. Benedict never acknowledged it existed. But Alice could see it, in the way Cecily's hand rested on the arm of her chair, not relaxed, held. In the way she said, "your court," instead of "the court," marking the distance. In the way she looked at Benedict sometimes with an expression that wasn't anger, but something closer to exhaustion. She wants something from him, Alice thought, and he doesn't know what it is. Later, Benedict found Alice in the kitchen. She was eating soup. Dan had gone to bed. The kitchen was empty except for the hum of a refrigerator and the distant tick of a clock that was older than most governments. Benedict stood in the doorway. "Miss Ward?" She looked up, soup spoon in hand, hair escaping from whatever she'd done to it that morning, a smear of ink on her wrist from writing her reports by hand. He was looking at her now, not the careful not looking from the library. Looking. His eyes were darker than she remembered, amber at the edges, wine dark at the center. "Your Majesty," she said, "there's soup." "I don't eat soup." "I know. It's a formality. I'm being polite." He stepped into the kitchen. The temperature dropped. Not the room temperature, the temperature of the air between them. His proximity was a physical fact, cold and specific, the way stone is cold when you press your palm to it. "Your reports," he said, "have been received." And? Sinclair has described them as an affront to the profession of intelligence gathering. That sounds about right. He has also described them as the most accidentally productive reconnaissance in the history of this court. Alice put down her spoon. "I don't know what I'm doing." Benedict's head tilted. That same 2-degree mechanical precision. "Explain." "I mean, I don't know what I'm doing. As a spy, I don't know how to spy. I've never spied. I listed Greg's Crab Shack as my previous employer because it was my previous employer. I don't speak Italian. I don't read Latin. I don't know what counter-surveillance is. I sat in a kitchen and talked to people about soup, and apparently that's intelligence? I don't know what's happening." The kitchen was very quiet. Benedict Marchand stood in the silence for a long time. He was not breathing. Alice had learned to notice this, the moments when a vampire forgot to perform the human function of respiration, and the room went still in a way that was different from empty. "You identified Roland's gate surveillance on your first day," he said. "I noticed a guy staring at a gate. You cataloged Corwin's behavioral shifts across 3 reports with enough granularity that Sinclair was able to identify his contact in the Sterling Alliance. I said he seemed stressed and ate lunch alone on Wednesdays. You described Lady Cecily's library reorganization in terms that revealed her strategic reorientation of household priorities. I said she put the old books near the fire." He was quiet again. Then, very carefully, as if the words cost him something, "You see things. I talk to people." "That is what I said." She looked at him. He was standing 5 feet away, and he might as well have been standing in another century. The candlelight caught the edge of his jaw, the line of his throat, the place where his collar met skin that was paler than the fabric. "Your hand," he said. She looked down. She'd cut herself earlier, nicked her finger on a wine glass during the evening's tasting education, which she was failing spectacularly. A thin line of dried blood ran along her index finger. She looked back up. He hadn't moved. But something in his face had changed, a tightness at the jaw, a quality of focus that made the air between them feel like it was holding its breath. "It's nothing," she said. "Paper cut. Well, glass cut. I'm not great with the wine thing." "You should bandage it." "It's dried." "You should bandage it." The second time had a different weight, lower, the vowel slightly flattened. She could feel the temperature in the room change, not warmer, not cooler, but denser, as if the air had developed an opinion about proximity. She looked at him, really looked. His jaw had gone tight, not clenched, but held, the way you hold a door closed against wind. His hands, which had been resting at his sides, were now at the edge of the counter, fingers pressing into the stone with a precision that looked deliberate. She could see the tendons in his wrists. They were very still. "Are you—" She stopped. She didn't know what question she was asking. She only knew that the man standing 4 feet away from her had stopped breathing, and that the room felt like it had stopped breathing with him. And that something had shifted between glass of wine in a kitchen and the most careful a 600-year-old predator has ever been about 4 feet of distance. "I am fine," he said. The words were precise and slightly wrong, like a sentence translated from a language that didn't have a word for fine. "You don't look fine." "I am 600 years old," I have excellent control. That's not the same as fine. Something moved in his expression, a ghost of something, a muscular memory in the temple and jaw that lasted less than a second before the composure reassembled. He stepped back, one step, precise, controlled. The distance opened like a door, and Alice thought, oh. Not the kind of oh that means understanding, the kind that means trouble. The kind that happens when you look at someone who has just stepped away from you with the deliberate care of a man handling something fragile, and you realize you wanted him to step forward. She had not been prepared for this. She had been prepared for vampire courts, cryptic instructions, intelligence she didn't know how to gather, and handwritten notes sealed with wax. She had not been prepared for a man who stood in a kitchen and chose not to breathe because the alternative was too much, and made that choice look like the most dangerous thing she'd ever seen. Right, she said. I'll bandage it. He left without another word. His footsteps made no sound on the stone floor. But at the door he paused, not turned, paused. His hand on the frame, his back to her, the line of his shoulders carrying something that hadn't been there when he'd walked in. Alice. Yes? The compass is in your desk drawer, second from the left. You sent a compass. You asked which way was south. In a report, weeks ago. I read all of them. A pause. I read them more than once. He left. She listened until she couldn't hear him anymore, which took about 2 seconds, because she'd never been able to hear him at all. She looked at the cut on her finger. She looked at the doorway where he'd been standing. She thought about a man who read her soup reports more than once. Shit, Alice said to the empty kitchen. Chapter 4. The Decoy. It was Sinclair who told her, not on purpose. Sinclair was far too professional to reveal classified information to an asset, but he had come to the estate for a logistics review, and when Alice met him at the door, he did not look at her the way you look at an operative whose mission is ongoing. He looked at her the way you look at something that has served its purpose. The logistics review, Alice said, sitting across from him in her small room. That's not what this is. Sinclair folded his hands. Something's finished, isn't it? Something I wasn't told about. Miss Ward. There was someone else. Sinclair did not deny it. How long? The primary operative was extracted 12 days ago. The assignment was completed before your 3rd week. What did they get? Documentation of the Sterling Alliance terms. Troop disposition along the eastern border. Everything His Majesty needed to renegotiate from a position of strength. Sinclair's voice was careful. The mission was a success. 12 days ago. Alice's voice was very level. The kind of level that happens when everything underneath it has gone quiet. I've been here for 5 weeks. The actual mission was done in 3. And I've been, what? Staying? Reporting? Sitting in the kitchen writing about soup while your presence provided ongoing cover for I was the distraction. Sinclair closed his mouth. He needed someone the Voss household would notice, someone visible, someone who would draw attention while the real operative worked. She could hear her own voice building something she didn't want to finish. And a broke human with no connections, no training, no one who would come looking. The operation required don't. Her voice was quiet and very level. Don't tell me what the operation required. He planned this before the interview, she said. The operational structure was designed prior to, before he met me. Sinclair paused. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its professional register. Something underneath, older, tireder, almost gentle. Before he met you. Yes. She sat in her room for a long time after Sinclair left. The room was small and neat and full of someone else's furniture, and she had made it hers over 5 weeks without meaning to. A stack of reports on the desk, Dan's recipe for the soup pinned to the wall, a borrowed sweater from the kitchen she'd never returned. She had liked it here. That was the thing that hurt worse than the betrayal. She had liked it. She had liked the estate and the kitchen and Dan's soup, and Cecily's library, and Roland's sad vigil at the gate. She had liked being useful in a way that wasn't about qualifications or credentials or proving she belonged. She had liked being Alice Ward, cultural liaison, because for the first time in her life, the title didn't matter. What mattered was that she showed up and paid attention. And it had all been a distraction. A noise in the system. A warm body placed in a rival's household to draw attention, while the real work happened somewhere she would never see. She was, as she had always been, the second pick. Benedict came that night. She heard him before she saw him, or rather, she felt him. Not a sound, an absence of sound. The hallway outside her door went quiet in a way that meant something large and old and careful was standing in it. She opened the door. He stood in the corridor with his hands at his sides and his face arranged in the expression of a man who had prepared an explanation and was realizing, at this exact moment, that the explanation was not going to be sufficient. "You knew," Alice said. "Alice, you knew what I was. You knew I wasn't a spy. You knew I couldn't decode your messages or find the South Gate or identify an operative if one sat on my lap. You hired me because I was nobody." The managed mode held for 3 sentences. Then it didn't. "You were not supposed to be." He stopped. The muscles in his jaw moved once. The stillness that followed was not his usual composed stillness, but something raw. The stillness of a predator who has discovered that the thing it has been hunting is also the thing it cannot bear to lose. "I was not supposed to be what?" Alice said. He couldn't answer. She watched him not answer. She watched a man who had directed intelligence operations for 600 years stand in a corridor and fail to produce a sentence. "You look terrible," she said. This was true. His skin was paler than usual. Not luminous pale, but drawn, translucent at the temples, the faint map of veins visible beneath. His hands, usually so precisely still, had a quality of restraint that she had learned to recognize. He was hungry. He hadn't fed properly in weeks. "When did you last eat?" "That is not relevant." "When?" The subject of this conversation is, "Benedict, when did you last eat?" His jaw tightened. The amber in his eyes had gone darker, edging toward something older than amber. 17 days. 17? She stared at him. "You've been starving yourself for 17 days?" "I have been preoccupied." "With what?" He looked at her, in the dim hallway light, with his composure cracked and his hunger visible, and his careful, centuries-old diplomatic framework lying in pieces around his feet. He looked less like a king and more like a man who had made a terrible mistake and understood, precisely and too late, the dimensions of it. "With you," he said. Alice sat down on the edge of the bed. She was aware that she was angry. She was aware that the anger was justified, complete, and correct. She was also aware that the man standing in her doorway had not eaten in 17 days because he had been thinking about her, and that this was simultaneously the most romantic and the most stupid thing she had ever heard. "Sit down," she said. "I should. Sit down." He sat. He sat in the single chair in her small room in the house of his political enemy, and he sat with the careful posture of someone who has been sitting in chairs for 6 centuries and has specific opinions about each one. Alice rolled up her sleeve. "What are you doing?" he said. "You're going to eat." "Alice, you're going to eat, because you look like a man who is about to fall over, and I'm still technically your employee, and I am not going to be the person who let the vampire king faint in Lady Cecily's guest room because he was too busy being guilty to have dinner." His hands were gripping the armrests of the chair. She could see the knuckles, white, the tendons standing clear beneath pale skin. His eyes had gone fully dark, the amber swallowed by something deeper, older. "This is not," his voice had dropped, half an octave, maybe more. The vowels were different. "This is not how this is done." "How is it done?" "With consent. discussion, an understanding of what it, I consent, we've discussed it. I understand you need to eat, and I have a wrist. Can we skip the ceremony? He looked at her wrist. He looked at it the way someone looks at a door they have been standing outside of for a very long time. Then his cold fingers closed around her arm, and she felt the temperature difference like a statement. His skin against hers, winter against summer. The fundamental fact of what he was made suddenly, specifically, undeniably physical. The bite was quick, a pressure, then a sharp, bright pain that faded into something warmer, deeper, more complicated than pain. She could feel her pulse in her wrist, could feel it being pulled, could feel him. Not his thoughts, not words. A sensation, vast and old and desperately lonely, like standing in a cathedral at 3 a.m. and realizing no one else is coming. Centuries of it, centuries of walking through rooms full of people and being fundamentally, structurally alone. And underneath that, newer, smaller, terrifying in its specificity, the shape of a woman eating soup in a kitchen. The handwriting on reports that made no professional sense and complete emotional sense. The sound of a voice saying, "There's soup," as though that were a thing you offered a 600-year-old predator, and meaning it. He pulled away. His lips were darker, his eyes were black amber wine dark, and he was breathing, actually breathing, which he never did, which meant something had broken through the 6th century barrier between what he was and what he felt. His face was close, very close. She could feel the cold of him, not just his hand on her wrist, but the air around him, the temperature of proximity, and underneath the cold, something warmer than she'd expected, as though the blood, her blood, had changed something fundamental about the distance between them. His mouth was an inch from hers. She could see the tension in his jaw, the restraint that was costing him something visible. His eyes dropped to her mouth and came back up, and the look in them was not composed, not managed, not 6 centuries of diplomatic training. It was a man who wanted something and was choosing, in this exact second, not to take it. "Alice," he said. Her name in his mouth sounded like it had always been there. She almost closed the distance. Almost. Her hand was on his jaw. When had she put it there? And his skin was cold and smooth, and she could feel the muscle underneath clench at her touch, like she'd done something unexpected, something new, something he hadn't been touched like in a very long time. "I know," she said. "I felt it." She pulled back. Not because she wanted to, because she was angry, and she was right to be angry, and kissing a man who had made her disposable while he was still kneeling by her chair with her blood on his mouth was the kind of decision that would make everything harder and nothing clearer. He let go of her wrist. The place where his fingers had been was cold, and she could feel it warming back to life as her blood remembered where it was supposed to go. She could still feel him, not supernaturally, not through any blood bond, but the way you feel someone after that kind of closeness. The shape of his loneliness, the specificity of his attention, the way he'd said her name like he'd been saying it in his head for weeks. "Is this going to get easier?" she asked. "No. You could have lied. I have 600 years of practice at lying. I don't want to lie to you. That is..." He stopped. The muscle at his temple worked once. "That is new." "I'm still angry with you," she said. "I know. You used me." "Yes. I was disposable." He looked at her. The managed mode was gone. Whatever was underneath, the real thing, the 600-year-old man who had built a life out of never needing anyone, was sitting in a chair in her room looking at her like she had rearranged the architecture of his entire existence. "You were," he said. "And then you weren't. And I did not know what to do with that." "Figure it out," Alice said. She closed the door. Chapter 5. The Italian Lesson. Alice did not go back to Benedict's court. She thought about going home, She thought about Gerald and the apartment she couldn't afford and the 4 months of back rent and the life where she was nobody's asset and nobody's decoy and nobody's anything. She could go back to that. She could go back to being the woman who nodded along in interviews and called it pride. She chose to stay. Not for Benedict, not because it was easier than leaving, because for 5 weeks she had walked through a building full of ancient vampires and been good at something. Not something she'd lied about, not something on a fake resume, but the actual thing she could do, which was listen and notice and care about whether the staircase was walnut or oak. She had been good at it, and people had liked her for it, and she was not going to give that up because a man she was furious with had failed to deserve her. She stayed at the Voss estate, not as a spy, not as a decoy, but as what the business card had always said she was, a cultural liaison. She was good at it. She had been good at it the entire time. Lady Cecily noticed the shift. "You've stopped sending reports," Cecily said one evening. They were in the East Wing library. Cecily was reorganizing the shelves again. It seemed to be her primary coping mechanism, and Alice respected that. Alice froze. "You knew?" "My dear, you've been writing dispatches by hand at 2 a.m., and giving them to a courier who lands on your windowsill like a distressed pigeon. I have been alive for 400 years. I notice things." "And you didn't stop you?" "No. Your reports were charming. I read several of them. You described Dan's soup with a level of detail that I found professionally flattering." "You read my—" Alice sat down. "Oh, no. Oh, yes. The one about Roland and the South Gate was particularly entertaining. He was mortified." Alice put her face in her hands. When she looked up, Cecily was watching her with an expression that was not angry, but was something more devastating. Understanding. "You're not a spy," Cecily said. "I am very much not a spy." "No, you're something considerably more dangerous." Cecily shelved a book with the precision of someone who had been shelving books in this library since before the building had electricity. "You're observant, and you're kind, and people tell you things because they sense, correctly, that you will actually listen. That's not dangerous. It is the most dangerous thing in the world, Miss Ward. Ask any intelligence service." Alice looked at her. "You're not angry?" "I'm 400 years old. I have been spied on by professionals. Being spied on by someone who genuinely wanted to know whether my staircase was walnut or oak was—" Cecily paused. "Refreshing. I do genuinely care about the staircase. I know. That's why it worked." Cecily set down the book she'd been shelving and turned to face Alice fully. "He sent you here because he thought you were expendable. I let you stay because I knew you weren't." "You—" "What?" "I told you. I notice things. You were not a spy. You were too kind to be a spy. Too visible. Too present. A real operative would have been invisible. You were the most visible person in my household within 3 days. Which meant either Benedict had lost his mind or you were something else entirely." "I was something else entirely." "Yes," Cecily smiled. It was the kind of smile that had survived 4 centuries and still had warmth in it. "You were genuine. Do you have any idea how rare that is in our world?" "So you kept me around because I was nice?" "I kept you around because you were the first honest line of communication between my court and Benedict's in 70 years. Cecily's smile turned sharper, not unkind, but political in a way that reminded Alice she was talking to a woman who'd survived 4 assassination attempts. "Every report you wrote went to him. Every observation you made about my household told him something real about who I am now, not who I was when he seized my territory. You were a window, Alice. I didn't need to spy on him. I needed him to see me. And you were the lens." Alice stared at her. "You used me too. I gave you a home and excellent soup and never once asked you to betray your employer. That is considerably more generous than what he did. That's, Alice paused, actually fair. Of course it's fair. I'm 400 years old. I've had time to refine my ethics. Cecily shelved another book. Now, are you going to keep standing there looking stricken? Or are you going to help me figure out how to make that man say a word he hasn't used since 1683? How do you know about the 1683 thing? Everyone knows about the horse. Alice spent the following days doing what she should have done from the beginning, her job. She organized a dinner. She coordinated a cultural exchange with a human gallery downtown. She sat with household members and asked them what they wanted, not what they needed, not what protocol required, but what they wanted. And they told her, because no one had asked in a very long time. And in the telling, she began to understand what Cecily wanted. It took 3 conversations, 2 long silences, and one evening watching Cecily stand alone in the garden at dusk, facing east toward the territory she had lost. It wasn't the land. It had never been the land. She wants an apology, Alice said to Sinclair over the phone. Sinclair had started taking her calls, which Alice interpreted as either professional necessity or emotional collapse. An apology? Benedict took the Eastern Territory from her in, when was it? 1797. In 1797. And he never acknowledged it, not the seizure, not the insult, not the fact that she had held it for 200 years before that, and he took it in a single season because the council said he could. It was a lawful territorial consolidation. I don't care what it was lawfully. She does. She's been holding this for over 200 years because nobody ever said that was wrong. 229 years of maintaining a rival court, building alliances, training household staff, reorganizing her library every season like a woman who can't sit still in a room that was taken from her, all because nobody looked her in the eye and said the word. Miss Ward. What word, Sinclair? Sorry. The word is sorry. It's not a complicated word. It has 2 syllables. Sinclair was quiet for a long time. She could hear him breathing, which meant he was choosing to breathe, which meant he was thinking carefully about what to say next. That is not something His Majesty does. I know. He has not apologized for anything since approximately 1683. What happened in 1683? He was wrong about a horse. It was a very specific incident. He apologized to the horse. He apologized to a horse, but not to a woman he wronged? The horse did not have political implications. Alice closed her eyes. Tell him. Miss Ward, what you are suggesting would require the king to publicly acknowledge that a territorial action taken under his authority was wrong. Yes. I'm suggesting he say a thing was wrong. I understand this is unprecedented. Tell him anyway. Sinclair hung up. Benedict arrived at the Voss estate 3 days later. He arrived alone. No security, no diplomatic entourage, no Sinclair positioned discreetly by the door with contingency plans and an expression of professional suffering. A sitting vampire king entering a rival's territory alone was either a declaration of peace or a declaration of something much worse, and every vampire in the building knew which one it was. Cecily received him in the East Wing library. Alice stood by the door. Again. But this time she wasn't pretending. Lady Cecily, Benedict said, I have come to discuss the Eastern Territory. After 70 years. 68. You are still counting. I am always counting. He paused. The stillness was back, the 600-year-old stillness that made the air around him feel heavier. But underneath it, Alice could see what she had learned to see, the cost. The effort of standing in a room with someone he had wronged and preparing to do the one thing his centuries had never required of him. The seizure of the Eastern Territory in 1797, Benedict said, was lawful. Cecily's expression did not change. It was strategically justified. It was endorsed by the council. It followed every protocol of territorial consolidation available under the charter. He stopped. The silence in the library was absolute. The kind of silence that only exists in rooms where no one is breathing. It was also wrong. Cecily's hand, resting on the arm of her chair, trembled. Once. Then she was still again, but the stillness was different, not held, but released. I took something that you had built, Benedict said. I took it because I could. Not because the law permitted it, it did, and I used that, but because I did not consider that the law being available did not make the action right. I did not consider you. That was wrong. And I have let 68 years pass without saying so. The library was very quiet. You let more than 68 years pass, Cecily said. Her voice was level, but her eyes were bright. You let 229. I know. It took a human to tell you. Benedict glanced at Alice. The glance lasted less than a second, but it carried the weight of something that had been building for 5 weeks and 17 days of not eating and 12 handwritten reports about soup. Yes, he said. It did. Cecily stood. She crossed the library. She took Benedict's hand, cold meeting cold, two old things recognizing each other across centuries of damage. Thank you, she said. It has been a very long time since anyone said the word. Alice found him in the kitchen afterward. He was standing where she'd been standing 5 weeks ago, by the counter, in the light of the refrigerator that Dan always forgot to close. He looked the way he always looked, tall, pale, precisely assembled, the kind of still that made the air around him feel like it was waiting for permission to move. She's not going to fight you for the territory, Alice said. No. She never was. She just wanted you to say it. I know that now. Because I told you. Because you told me. He turned from the counter. In the blue-white light of the refrigerator, he looked almost human, almost warm, almost like someone who had not spent 6 centuries building walls out of precision and protocol and the careful absence of words. Alice. Yes? You were not expendable. You made me expendable. I designed the operation with a decoy asset. I designed it before I knew who would fill the role. I designed it before I read your application, which listed your emergency contact as a cat named Gerald, and before I sat across from you in an interview and watched you lie about speaking Italian with the single most transparent expression I have encountered in 600 years of reading faces. So you knew. I knew from the first sentence, you do not speak Italian. You do not know what a counter-surveillance technique is. You are the worst liar I have ever met, and I have met liars who toppled governments. Then why did you hire me? He looked at her. The managed mode was gone. The cold public face was gone. What was left was something she had felt during the feeding. Old, lonely, specific. Because you sat in my office and looked me in the eye and lied. And I wanted to know who would do that. Someone who needs rent money. Someone who would rather walk into a building full of vampires than admit she needed help. Alice felt something shift in her chest. Not anger. She was still angry, would be angry for a while, had a right to be angry, that she intended to exercise fully. But underneath the anger, in the space where she kept the things she didn't say, something loosened. I don't speak Italian, she said. I know. Your pronunciation has been causing a diplomatic incident since the second day. She blinked. What? You greeted Lady Cecily in what you believed was Italian. You told her she had the face of a well-maintained turnip. What? She was delighted. She has been calling you the turnip girl to her household ever since. It is the most affectionate nickname she has given a human in 2 centuries. Alice covered her face. Oh, God. It was, Benedict said, the most entertaining thing in my century. He sat down at the kitchen table. He sat the way he always sat, composed, precise, upright. But his hands, for the first time since she'd known him, were not perfectly still. His fingers rested on the table near hers, not touching, close. "Teach me," she said. "Teach you?" "Italian, actual Italian, so I stop calling people root vegetables." He looked at her hands on the table. He looked at the cut on her finger that had healed. He looked at the space between them. 4 inches of kitchen table, 5 weeks of reports, 600 years of not needing anyone, and one woman who had walked into it like a lit match. "Buongiorno," he said. "Buongiorno," she repeated. The vowels were wrong. That was catastrophic. "Teach me anyway." "Buonasera." "Buonasera." Worse. "I'm trying." "You told Lady Cecily she had the complexion of a well-maintained root vegetable. Trying is perhaps not the word." "You could have corrected me at any point." "I could have. I chose not to. Cecily was calling you the turnip girl by the second day. Roland laughed for the first time in 9 years. Your Italian was a diplomatic catastrophe, and it was the single most effective icebreaker I have witnessed in 6 centuries of court relations." Alice stared at him. "Are you telling me my terrible Italian was useful?" "Yes. You are useful, Alice. In ways I did not anticipate and cannot control and do not wish to. You are the most useful person I have ever met, and I spent the first 3 weeks trying to make that stop being true." "That's the worst compliment anyone has ever given me." It was not a compliment. It was a confession. She looked at him. He was sitting across from her, with the dawn light graying the windows behind him, and his managed mode was gone, and his composure was gone, and what was left was a man who had not confessed anything in 600 years, and was doing it in a kitchen over a language lesson, and she could see the effort it was costing him to stay in the chair and not retreat into the diplomat who never said anything that mattered. "Say it again," she said. "Which part?" "The part where I'm useful." "You are useful." "No, say what you meant." The muscle at his jaw worked. His hands, on the table, were perfectly still, but it was the kind of stillness that meant he was choosing it, holding himself in place. The predator precision of a man who was about to do something he couldn't take back. "You are necessary," he said. "You are. I have not needed anyone in 600 years. I built a court and an intelligence network and a political framework specifically designed to ensure I would never need anyone. And you walked into my office with a fake resume and a cat named Gerald, and I have not been able to stop thinking about you since. Which is inconvenient? Devastating." Alice got up. She walked around the table. She stood in front of him, close, the way she'd been close in the feeding. Except this time she wasn't angry, and she wasn't offering her wrist, and the space between them was something she was closing on purpose. She put her hand on his jaw. His skin was cold. The muscle underneath clenched at her touch, a ghost memory of a response his body no longer knew how to complete. "You're not breathing," she said. "No." "Is that because you don't need to, or because you can't right now?" "The second one." She kissed him. His mouth was cold. Not unpleasant cold, specific cold, the temperature of stone in winter, of water from a deep well, of something that had not been warm in 600 years and had stopped expecting warmth. She could feel the difference everywhere they touched. Her warm hand on his cold jaw, his cold fingers on the back of her warm neck, the place where her pulse beat against his palm and his palm did not beat back. He didn't move for a full second. 1 second of 600-year-old stillness, while something very old and very careful and very controlled came apart. Then his hand tightened on her neck, and he kissed her back with the focus of a man who had been waiting for this specific moment and had not known he was waiting. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't careful. It was precise. the way everything about him was precise. And underneath the precision was something raw and desperate, and so lonely she could feel it in her teeth. She was warm, and he was cold, and the place where they met was becoming something else entirely. Not warm, not cold, just them, just this. Just a kitchen in an enemy's house at dawn. She pulled back. His hand stayed on her neck. Cold fingers against warm skin. His eyes were dark, amber-ringed, and for the first time since she'd known him, completely unguarded. "I'm still angry with you," she said. "I know. I'm going to be angry for a while. I know. And I'm staying. Not at this court, not at yours. With you. There's a difference. If you want me around, it's because you want me around, not because I'm useful or expendable or strategically advantageous. I am a terrible spy and an excellent listener, and I accidentally called your political rival a turnip on our first day. And you are going to teach me Italian, and I am going to be terrible at it, and you are going to sit here and correct my vowels for as long as I want you to." "Yes," he said. "Yes? Yes, to all of it, every part, the anger and the Italian and the vowels, and you." Outside, the first gray light of dawn crept across the garden. Benedict moved his chair further from the window, a small, automatic gesture. Alice noticed. She pulled the curtain closed without being asked. He looked at the curtain. He looked at her. "Ripeti," she said. "Repeat." He repeated. She held his cold hand across the table, and neither of them moved. And the dawn came, and she had closed the curtain, and he was still there. A tapping at the window. They both looked. On the ledge outside, in the gray light of early morning, Ellsworth, the diplomatic courier, stood in his formal coat, holding a wax-sealed letter. He took in the scene, the king and the cultural liaison holding hands across a kitchen table, the drawn curtain, the open Italian textbook, with the expression of a man whose professional life had reached its final indignity. "Correspondence," Ellsworth said through the glass. "From Sinclair." Benedict did not let go of Alice's hand. "Leave it on the ledge. I have been standing on windowsills for 5 weeks, and you have done it with great distinction." Ellsworth placed the letter on the ledge. Through the glass, very quietly, he said, "I am requesting a transfer." He disappeared into the dawn. Alice looked at Benedict. Benedict looked at Alice. "You should give him a raise," she said. "I should give him several. He was going to be there tomorrow."